Hey everyone, welcome back to the FPS series. This is episode 22, and today we're going to work on procedural recoil. Right now when we fire the gun, it just sits there. There's no punch, there's no kick, there's no movement. We're going to fix that, and the cool part is we're just going to be reusing the same exact spring helper from the sway episodes, and we're just going to do it a little bit different way. So instead of the spring chasing a moving target, which is what we did before, we're going to kick it and then it's going to come back using that spring. Now the first thing we're going to do is actually we're going to go back to our weapon resource. We haven't touched this for a little bit. We want to be able to customize this recoil for different weapons so they feel different. So we're going to go into our weapon resource here. We have a bunch of different export variables that we need to add. We're going to put these into a group just because there's so many of them. And we'll call this recoil. So when we're doing our recoil, we're going to do a camera kick in addition to a model kick. So both of those things are going to work together. And we want to be able to adjust both of those values, how much they kick back within a particular weapon. And then there's a global adjustment that we can do for both the weapon and the camera. So we're going to adjust the camera and its pitch, yaw, and its roll. So we need those three values in here. First would be the cam pitch. These are all going to be floats. And think of them as degrees. They're going to come in as degrees within these export variables. So we're going to have 1 degree of kick for the camera when we pitch up as a default, and then recoil yaw. That would be your left and right, your y-axis. Just a little bit on that. Honestly, you could probably go without it if you wanted to. And then another export for our recoil cam roll. Now this probably is 0, but if you wanted to adjust it, you can. Then we're gonna have our model adjustments. And for our model, we're gonna do a kickback on the z-axis and position. And then we're gonna do a rotation kick on the, I believe, pitch. And that's gonna raise that gun up. If we go to our pistol scene, so if our weapon here, okay, we have our z-axis, we're gonna kick it back, right? Just kind of like that. And then we're gonna rotate it at the same time like that. So we're gonna have backward movement, and then we're gonna rotate it on the x-axis there. So we don't want that to be done beforehand. So we'll zero that out and go back to our weapon here, our resource. So we'll do recoil model kickback. That's a float, and just a little bit, nothing major there. And again, all these will be adjustable per weapon as well as a global adjustment. And then the rise, we're gonna do a little bit more of a rise here. We'll do 8 degrees on the muzzle to have that pitch up. And then another point, and we'll go back to the pistol weapon here, is, where that happens is going to be the origin. So think about where your pistol placement is. You don't want it to be back here because we're adjusting this. We're not adjusting the hero gun or whatever your model root is. Think about that, where you want that to actually rotate. All right, so that is going to be our new weapon settings there. I'm going to save that. And we already had, back long ago in our camera effects setting, we already had a weapon kick. We had added these, okay? This is the older version of what I had done, and this is not using springs. So we're gonna adjust this so we are using springs. So we're gonna go into our camera effects. This is just for the camera kick, mind you, and let's upgrade this. So we're gonna find the exports up here at the top. We have our subgroup here. Maybe space this out so you can see it a little bit better. There we go. So we have these groups, these subgroups, and we have a weapon kick. We were using weapon decay. We're not going to use this anymore. So we're going to get rid of this. You can comment that out or just delete. In fact, let's comment it out and we can use our deprecated low line there. And let's add some export variables. We're going to be adding for our cam. This is just for our spring, remember. So when we do our spring, we have our stiffness, our damping. So we're going to get our stiffness. Okay, we'll set this to 80. And really it's the relationship between the damping and the stiffness that gets you the feel that you want. So we have a stiffness of 80 and a damping of 10. And then finally, we're going to have a max just to make sure we can clamp this a little bit. For our max, we're going to do 50 degrees. That is the most that the camera can kick, which is quite a bit. But we don't want it to like flip around so you get sick. So we just set this to a nice max clamp. And this will also help clamp on any accumulated kicking angle. So when we're continuously firing, these are going to add on to each other. This will sort of max that out so you don't like end up shooting straight up in the air, although maybe you want that. So you can adjust that max angle there. So we'll set that. We don't have our var here. There we go. Now, obviously we have a weapon decay. We haven't declared it anymore, so we need to go get rid of that. But these will be our new exports here for our weapon kick. And then within our state, we had done a kick angles. Okay, so we're going to get rid of this too, or we can deprecate. That's fine. And we're going to use a recoil angles, and this will be a vector 3, 0. And then we also need the recoil velocity, and that's for our spring, vector 3, 0. Now let's go into the calculate view offset block that we've created a while ago at this point. We have these sort of commented out. See, here we have our weapon kick. We got our errors here. So this is going to go away. We're not going to do this version where we are adding this kick, which is what we had done, and then just moving toward. Spring is a better feel, so we want to use this spring like we're using it in other places. So we're going to get rid of this, all that. But the idea here is the same. We're still going to be adding an offset here, except we're just going to be using that spring to get back to ground 0. Essentially, the target here is always going to be 0. So the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to clamp delta, okay? So there's a chance that if the frame rate is weird, if there's a hitch or something goes wrong, we can actually flip this sign and the spring velocity, and it's going to mess everything up. So we're just going to make sure that we are always at least at 0.05, okay? And then we're going to get our max angle. That is the camera max angle that we talked about. So this is going to be degree to radian. Remember, everything that we had put in our exports were in degrees. So we get our degree to radian. That gives us our angle max. And then we have 3 different axes that we're going to be doing a spring on. So we're going to do this in a loop. So for axis in 3, so we have X, Y, and Z, we're going to apply these recoil angles. So let's just set R for our recoil, and then let's get our spring utility. That's the thing that we've used a number of times. We're going to apply recoil angles. So if you remember, the recoil angles was actually a vector 3. We can treat that like an array. And so if we're using 4 axis and 3, we're getting an index. That is going to be 0, 1, and 2, because we always start on 0. So doing 0 in this case, that's going to get the X value for our recoil angles. Because we're looping through this, this is just a different way of doing it. And then for our recoil velocity, we can also do that and get the X value for that. And then we will set our target back to 0. Then we need to put in our stiffness. That is going to be our recoil cam stiffness, and then our recoil cam damping, and then our delta value. So again, you see the utility of having the spring set up. That's all we had to have in order to make this a spring again. All right, now that we've done that, we've run that, we need to clamp that angles again. So within our axis, whatever axis we're in, we're going to clamp that. In this case, is going to be that pitch value. We don't want that pitch value to go beyond our angle that we set. That's going to be our angle max negative for the lower end, and then our angle max for the top end of that. So that keeps the pitch from going beyond the recoil cam max that we set. Then we need to take our recoil velocity here for whatever axis that we are on and set that to the Y value of our spring. Remember, this is returning a vector 2, basically the angle that we're in and then the velocity at which we're moving. And finally, we're going to take our angles. Remember, we are adjusting our position in our angles here and adding that all together. Then that's where we add back in our angles. Okay, so it's the same philosophy that we did when we put an S there, that we used for the camera effects very, very early on. I think that was even episode 2. We're just implementing the spring instead of the move toward, and that's what the change is. Now we're going to do the same thing for our kick. So if we go back to the add weapon kick, we have a bunch of errors. We don't have that variable anymore. So we're going to get rid of this. We might be able to copy some of this over though. So remember, we're using recoil angles now. So recoil angles X, and we're going to add that with the degree to radian of the pitch. Okay, this is our initial kick here, and then that can go away. And it's just the same process for degree to radian for the yaw and the roll. So what we can actually do is just take this, that's an S by the way, forgetting that quite a bit, and we can just paste that in, save that, and now we need to actually fire this kicking. So If we go into our weapon controller and down into our fire weapon function, that's running whenever we, press the mouse button, right above our hit scan or spawn projectile, let's add our recoil. So we're going to do our camera recoil only on a successful shot here. So we're not recoiling if we don't have any ammo. So if we have a camera, add weapon kick. Okay. And then for this weapon kick, we have different values, and that is coming from, if you remember, the weapon resource that we just worked on. So current weapon, this is our weapon resource, and recoil cam pitch, current weapon, recoil cam yaw, and then current weapon, recoil cam roll. All right, so that gives us all of the information from the weapon resource, different for every weapon. We are now adding that weapon kick, and we should be going back per our camera to our target. So let's test this. We should see the view move around, punch up when we fire, and we do. Now it's subtle. And it doesn't really sell it as much if the gun's not moving, obviously, but we do have a kick and we can adjust this. So if we go into our pistol resource here, we have our recoil options now. We need to put these in groups. It's a little scattered. So let's change our pitch. Let's make it really big just to see the difference here. All right. So there's our 5-degree pitch change. And you can see when we have that kind of smooth motion going up, and there's a little bit of a bounce that happens on the return, right? So we can make this even more exaggerated. Let's do 15. Now that bounce is even bigger. So this is more in line with a, giant shotgun than a pistol. So let's go back to, let's do 2 degrees. All right, it's a little bit clearer. So there's our camera kickback. Now, one thing I will note here is that the design of this is not meant to be super realistic. We're not changing where our aim is. That's why it's going back to where we were aiming. Some games will have it so when you shoot, like your aim moves up too, and you have to compensate for that. This is not the case. This is kind of an old school setup. So we're shooting and our aim is where it was going to be anyway. So we got the camera moving. Let's get the gun moving. So they're going to go back to our weapon controller here, and we're going to add more exports because we love exports. We have our export group. This is also going to be for recoil, export var recoil. We're going to have a Boolean for if we want to turn this off. We're going to have our spring settings that we need. So we're going to have our stiffness. I'm going to set that to 200, just based on values that I kind of played with myself. We have our damping. This is going to be 11. And we're going to have the max that we can, accumulate on our kickback, just like we did with our camera. It's going to be 0.15. Remember, these are in degrees. And then recoil pitch max, I'll have that be 0.4 equals. So this is the pitch here, and then this is actually the positional kickback. So that's what those two are planning for. Then we need to add our variables down here, and this is for our recoil. So in this case, we're going to have our recoil Z value. Remember, we're just moving the position on the forward and back. So we'll set that to 0. And we have the velocity. That's for our spring. That is also a float. And then we have our, you should be seeing a pattern here, and we'll have our pitch velocity. So this is all for the spring. So the spring is happy, but they're all going to be 0. So they'll get manipulated during the script, and that's the same name. So there we go. All right, so we have those. Let's add the kick function. We'll go down here. Let's go below our update Bob, and we're going to do add model recoil. This is what's going to add the Z position and the pitch, and then we will move back with our spring. So recoil Z plus equals, we're going to add to it current weapon. Remember, we're getting this from our weapon resource, and we had already set this. So model kickback, and then our recoil pitch, we're going to add to that as well. That's going to be degree to radians. That's how we're working. And let's grab our weapon resource and recoil model rise. So that's our pitch or up and down. So that'll add it. That's the same thought process that we did for our camera kick. And then once we add that, we need to recover back. So we're going to do an update recoil. Same principle that we've been doing for idle sway, look sway, strafe tilt, all of that. We'll have our delta here. This is going to return a vector 3. So we're going to get our recoil Z position here, and we'll use our spring utility. We're going to apply this like we've done, and as we've done before, we need those different values. So the value, the velocity we're moving at, the target, stiffness, damping, all of that. And that's going to be our recoil Z. Then our recoil Z velocity goes there. Target is 0. We want to go back to the home base. And recoil model still. Did I say stillness? Let's go fix that. Not sure why I put stillness, but stiffness, that's what I need. Stillness might still apply, I guess. Stiffness, not stillness. And then our damping, right? Recoil, model, damping, and our delta. All right, so we have that. That applies our kickback, our positional kickback. In fact, we can comment that. And then we have our muzzle rising under our pitch. And that's going to be the same process. So RP, that'll stand for recoil pitch. And spring utility, apply. See how useful this little static function is. Recoil pitch velocity. Target is 0. Recoil stiffness. Recoil damping delta. So that's the same process. That's for the kickback. That's for the pitch. Let's go back up to the kickback. We've got to do our settings again now that we've applied our spring to it. So we'll reset, we'll clamp. This will be a clamp of the X value for that spring, and it'll be the recoil model max negative, recoil model max positive. You should notice the pattern. We just did this with our camera. And then the velocity here is that Y value. Okay. And then we got to do the same thing for the muzzle rise, recoil pitch, clamp, RPX, recoil pitch max, right? Yes. Not the model max. Recoil pitch max. And then for the recoil pitch velocity, we'll set that to the Y value from our spring. And then we can return all of this in our vector 3, and we'll return our recoil Z value. All right, so now we need to apply these. We've calculated them. We've got our kickback. We've got our rising, our rotation of the gun. Now let's apply them. So we're going to go to our apply offsets. After we do our strafe tilt, we're going to do our recoil position. I'm going to set this to 0 by default. We have our recoil pitch, set that to 0 by default. And if we are recoiling, then our recoil position is going to be our update recoil delta, right? So our update, there we go. Our update recoil returns that vector 3, and that gives us our Z position change. So we're applying that. And then for our pitch, now I could have named these better because this is the same thing. So our recoil pitch here, this value, we're going to set that to the recoil pitch from above, which is a little bit confusing. So feel free to name those different things. But these two values are what we are getting from our springs. Then for our position, we're going to add, as we've done, our recoil position that we just got. And then for our rotation, we'll do the same thing. And then in this case, for our recoil, we're just doing the pitch, remember. So recoil pitch, and then the other values are 0. That adds the recoil, that model rise that we set. And the camera obviously can do the pitch and the yaw however you want. So that kind of also affects the model there. But the pitch is going to be more exaggerated than the camera. So that's why we do that. So we have that, and let's fire this also when we fire the weapon. So we'll go back into the weapon controller here, fire weapon, if camera, we've done that. So let's check if recoil. This is right under where we added the camera recoil, add model recoil. We'll save that, and let's test this out. We'll run our game. So we have our camera recoil. We should now also have the gun recoil. There we go. It's a little bit more believable now that the gun moves. And that gun procedural recoil is in addition to all the other movement that we're doing. So if we're tilted, we stay tilted. And if we're moving back or forward, which we could also add that tilt too. I didn't think about that. And now we've got our weapon kick and our camera kick. Now you can exaggerate that. So if we wanted to make it a bigger kick, let's just raise that to 0.5, make the model rise to 15. Let's run that. And that's a lot more exaggerated. You can then also fine tune the spring action that we have. Let's go back to our player, weapon controller, that's where that lives. Recoil, there's the stiffness and damping. So if you wanted to get rid of that bounciness, you could up the damping. See how that changes? That's a little bit of a different feel there. Or we could have very, very low damping, and you could have a jelly gun. And there's our procedural recoil. Pretty good. All right, then we have one more thing. We just want to reset the recoil, because I think if we switch between our guns here, yeah, see, we're carrying over that recoil. So let's go back to where we're spawning the weapon model. We reset the bob, reset recoil. All right, so recoil, I'm just gonna zero everything out. 0, recoil Z velocity, 0, recoil Z pitch, sorry, 0, and recoil pitch velocity, 0. So that zeroes it out. And when you're switching between then, our shotgun, so our camera carries it, but our gun doesn't. In fact, we should make a little procedural weapon switch thing too. Maybe that'd be next episode. So that's it. We've just basically adjusted what we had, but we introduced the spring into it. And with that, we have some settings to make it tunable and adjustable depending on your gun. Now, if we had, I just want to try something. Let's do an automatic. All right, so we have pistol. Let's make it automatic. I don't know what settings this is. Yeah, see? So now we get that kick. So if we had an automatic weapon, that camera pitch would probably be a little bit less. Yeah. Now you see, you get that, because we're moving the camera randomly, you get free spray, right? So when we're further away, that spray is larger. And then if we're, really got a lot of movement here, and let's even add a roll to our camera, because the camera is, determining where we're aiming here. That's almost like a Quake 2 type, because they would roll the camera, and there you go. Okay, reset those. Don't need to be automatic, but it does work. All right, so thanks for watching. As always, you can get these files exactly as they are at this point right now in the project on my Patreon. Thank you to all the supporters who are on there. It's been awesome to see everybody join in. We're going to be doing lots more. We're going to be adding some other stuff. I'm going to try to get these out as quickly as I can. But in the meantime, thank you for watching, and as always, keep creating.